The distress signal from Outpost Zeta had been playing on a 4-hour loop for 11 days before anyone at Central Command admitted what it probably meant. Commander Rail Doss heard it for the first time while eating a reheated bowl of rice in the officer's mess. A sound like gravel in a blender. Words dissolving beneath static, and beneath the static, just barely, a human voice telling someone not to come. She set her spoon down. She listened to all 4 hours of it. Then she walked to the briefing room, poured herself a cup of coffee she didn't drink, and waited for someone to tell her what she already knew. 2 Pathfinder teams, 18 people total, had gone to Zeta 9 in the past 14 months. The first team had gone quiet 3 weeks after landing. The second team had been dispatched to find out why. They went quiet in 9 days. Now there was this signal. Garbled, desperate, cut off mid-sentence. And a planet that Command had spent 11 billion credits terraforming, because it sat at the edge of the Milky Way's outer arm, perfectly positioned as a staging point for the next generation of deep exploration. Zeta 9 was valuable. Zeta 9 was irreplaceable. Zeta 9 had killed 18 people and no one knew how. Doss pulled the mission briefing across the table and read it without expression. The Pathfinder program had always been a volunteer-only operation. You signed the waiver knowing the risks. You understood that being first on an alien world meant there were no protocols for whatever you found. Because whatever you found had never been found before. The waiver was 3 pages. Most people read the first page and signed. She had read all 3 pages, twice, then she had signed it. The rest of the team filtered in over the next 20 minutes. Sergeant Vance Okafor arrived first, moving with the quiet deliberateness of a man who had stopped being surprised by bad news sometime around his 3rd deployment. He was wide through the shoulders, economical in motion, and had a habit of pressing his thumb into the center of his palm when he was thinking hard. A tell Doss had catalogued years ago and never mentioned. Behind him came Dr. Petra Solon, the team's biologist, carrying a data tablet and a paper cup of something that steamed faintly. Petra was the youngest of them, 31, with the sharp, slightly impatient focus of someone who had always been the smartest person in the room and was just barely starting to understand what that cost. Lieutenant Haroon Ek came in last, running 3 minutes late, sliding into his chair and giving Doss a look that said he'd already read the briefing and had questions he wasn't sure he wanted answered. So, Haroon said, 2 teams, 18 people. No bodies recovered, no explanation, no weapon signatures, no pathogen signatures, no atmospheric event. Just gone, not gone, Doss said. The signal says there are bodies. Haroon was quiet for a moment. How many? All of them. Another silence, the kind that fills a room the way smoke fills a room slowly from the edges in. Vance pressed his thumb into his palm. Petra looked at her tablet and then looked away from it. The planet's atmosphere is breathable, Doss continued. But the sulfur content means suits outside the outpost structure. Volcanic terrain, high seismic activity. Central Command's working theory is a geological event. She paused. They'd like us to confirm that. They'd like us to confirm it so they can move forward with colonization, Haroon said. Yes, even though 2 teams already, yes, he exhaled. Great. The briefing took another 40 minutes, and when it was over, Doss walked to the hangar bay and stood looking at the transport vessel. The Cormorant, an aging, mid-range hauler that had been pressed into Pathfinder service because the program's budget had been cut for the 4th time in 6 years. It had a new coat of paint and a recalibrated navigation array, and a cargo bay currently loaded with 4 body bags in addition to all the standard equipment. Someone had loaded 4 body bags. Someone had done the math and decided 4 was the right number, and loaded 4. She counted them twice. Then she went to her bunk and lay down without sleeping. Zeta 9 from orbit looked like a bruise. The planet's surface was dark reddish-brown, streaked with the black of ancient lava flows and the pale gray of volcanic ash fields. And where the sun caught the clouds at the right angle, there was a faint, sulfurous yellow haze that ringed the whole planet like a warning label. Doss stood at the observation port and watched it grow and said nothing. The outpost was visible from 30 kilometers up, a cluster of prefabricated structures in a shallow valley between 2 ridgelines, chosen for its relative shelter from the surface winds. The structures were intact. Every surface sensor on the Cormorant confirmed no fire damage, no structural failure, no sign of atmospheric breach. Whatever had happened here had not damaged the buildings. 11 bodies inside, Petra said, reading from the scan display. 6 in the main structure, 3 in the secondary lab, 2 in the suit-up room, 3 of the second team unaccounted for. The signal mentioned bodies outside, Vance said. Scans show 3 heat signatures at approximately 0 in the southwest perimeter. They've been there long enough that the suit insulation is giving ghost readings. He paused. They're not alive. No one said anything to that. They landed in the valley at 0740 local time and suited up in silence. The suits were good ones, full environmental seals, integrated comms, and a small LED panel on the left wrist that monitored atmospheric conditions in real time. Doss checked her suit twice, and then checked Haroon's, a habit she'd never been able to break. He let her do it without comment. The door opened and the planet came in. Not literally, not through the seal, but in the way that alien environments always came in when you first stepped onto them. Through the eyes, through some animal instinct that recognized wrongness before the brain caught up. The light was wrong. It was daylight but flattened, colorless, as if the sun had been hung behind frosted glass. The ground was porous volcanic rock, dark and honeycombed, and in every direction it looked the same color, the same texture, the same absolute indifference. In the distance, both ridgelines steamed faintly from vents in the rock. Doss took 3 steps out and stopped. She turned slowly, taking in the full 360. She pressed her radio. Okafor, you see that? The outgassing from the vents? Vance said. No. She pointed northwest where the ridgeline met the valley floor. The shapes, he looked. A long pause. Rocks. Yes, she said, there are a lot of them, there were. The valley floor was scattered with boulders of various sizes, irregular and pitted. The kind of geological debris you'd expect from an active volcanic environment. Nothing about them was unusual. She knew that. She kept looking at them anyway. They found the bodies of the first team exactly where the scans had shown them, inside the main structure, laid out across the floor of the central module, with a geometric precision that made Doss's stomach case clench. Not scattered, not collapsed where they'd fallen, but arranged. In 2 rows, face down, each one wearing their suit with the helmet unsealed and each one hollowed. That was the only word for it. The suits still had their shape, but the people inside them were reduced to shells, the organic material dissolved or removed, leaving structures of dried skin around frameworks of bone, and in each torso, clearly visible through the unsealed suit fronts, a single smooth stone, roughly fist-sized, pale gray, sitting in the chest cavity where lungs and heart had been. Petra made a sound behind her face shield that was almost scientific in its flatness. Almost. The second team found this, she said. They documented it. They sent the signal. And then they stayed, Vance said. Why would they stay? Because they were pathfinders, Doss said. They stayed because they were trying to figure it out. She crouched over the nearest body and looked at the stone without touching it. It was smooth the way river stones were smooth, worn, not cut. It had the particular gray of cooled basalt. She pulled up her wrist scanner and held it over the stone and watched the readings populate and then stared at them for a long time. Petra, she said, look at this. The biologist came over and looked at the scanner. Her eyes changed. Not fear, exactly, but the thing that precedes fear when your brain is still trying to up to information your instincts have already processed. That's biological, she said. Those readings are biological. The stone is biological. She straightened. Or it reads biological, which means it's not a stone, Doss said. Outside 400 meters to the southwest, the 3 members of the second team who had made it out of the main structure had been found by whatever had killed the first team. Their suits were intact, their bodies were not. The same stones, 3 of them, sat in the ash field in a rough triangle around the dried shells of what had once been people, as if placed there with intention, as if marking something. Haroon was standing 10 meters away from the nearest one when he noticed that the rock behind it, a large, irregular boulder about knee-height, mottled gray-brown, unremarkable, had moved. He didn't say anything at first. He looked at it for 4 or 5 seconds, telling himself he was wrong, telling himself it was the light or the slight shimmer of heat from a vent somewhere nearby. He looked at the position of the rock relative to the shape of its shadow. The shadow hadn't changed. The rock had moved, not much. Perhaps 15 centimeters to the right of where it had been 30 seconds ago. Commander, he said, I need you out here. They gathered around the boulder and watched it. It did not move again while they were watching. That was in some ways worse. It's not a rock, Petra said. She had the scanner out again, moving it slowly across the surface of the boulder. The readings were climbing into biological parameters, even faster than the smaller stones inside. It's God, the mineral integration is extraordinary. It's incorporated actual geological material into its exterior. I can't tell where the rock ends and the organism begins without. I'd need to biopsy it. I'd need to cut into it. Don't cut into it, Vance said. I know, Petra said. I'm not going to cut into it. They went back inside, and Doss locked the exterior door and stood in the central module with the bodies of the first team and tried to think. The other team's logs were still on the Outpost Zeta system, partially corrupted but retrievable. She pulled them up and began to read them. Vance and Haroon watched over her shoulder. Petra went to the secondary lab and began running analysis on the stone, the biological stone, that she had finally carefully extracted from the nearest body using gloves and a specimen container. The logs told the story in fragments, the way traumatic stories always get told, not linearly, not with the clarity of hindsight, but in stops and starts, with gaps that widened as the team got smaller. Day 1, the second team had found the bodies just as Doss's team had found them. Day 2, they had begun the documentation. Day 3, Sergeant Cole of the second team had gone outside to take atmospheric samples and had not come back. Day 4, they found what was left of Cole in the ash field, and the entry just said, stone. 1 stone in his chest still warm. Day 5, 2 more were taken in the night. Day 6, Dr. Vashti of the second team had made a discovery. The creatures, because they were creatures, clearly it was beyond any reasonable doubt, had at one point been passive. The first team's logs, before they had gone quiet, mentioned the rocks on the valley floor. They had described them as curiosities. They had, on day 8 of their stay, captured one, brought it inside, tried to study it. The creature, dehydrated, separated from its sulfurous environment, had died in the lab, and something had changed after that. Something had answered. They woke them up, Haroon said. The first team didn't know what they were, Doss said. Neither did the second team until it was too late. He sat down heavily on a supply crate. So they've been here the whole time, just living, breathing sulfur, minding their own business. And then we showed up and killed one of them in a lab, and they decided we were a threat. Or food, Vance said. Or both, Petra said from the lab doorway. She was holding her scanner up. She looked pale, but controlled. Ken. The way doctors sometimes look when they are processing something that would break a non-doctor in half. Come look at this. The stone, the organism was alive, barely but alive. Under the scanner it showed a respiratory process so slow it registered as almost geological in its pace, cycling carbon dioxide and sulfur in, exhaling oxygen. The stone breathed oxygen. The same oxygen that was poisonous to it, in high concentrations, was a byproduct of its metabolism. It's a symbiote, Petra said, or it was. Look at the tissue structure. This is a reproductive body. The first team didn't kill a creature. They killed a child. The room was very quiet. How intelligent are they, Doss asked. Intelligent enough to organize, to arrange the bodies, to place the stones, the reproductive bodies, in the chests. That's deliberate. That's not instinct. Petra set the scanner down carefully. They're intelligent enough to grieve. Vance was at the window. He was looking out at the valley. He was very still. Commander, he said. She went to the window. The boulders on the valley floor, the rocks that had always been there, unremarkable, geological, were moving. Not fast, not dramatically, but they were moving, and in the colorless flat light of Zeta 9, she could see them drifting toward the outpost, with the slow, absolute patience of things that had no reason to hurry, because they had never, in all their existence, met anything they couldn't wear down. How many, Haroon said. All of them, Vance said. All the rocks. All of them. Doss went to the comm array and opened a channel to Central Command and said calmly and clearly, "This is Commander Doss, Pathfinder 3, Outpost Zeta 9. We have a situation, please respond." Static. The sulfurous atmosphere ate transmissions. She adjusted the gain and tried again. More static. She tried a third time on the emergency frequency and got a carrier signal but no voice. They could receive from her. She could see the uplink confirmation light, but she couldn't receive from them. Not in real time. She was 82 light minutes from the nearest relay station. So she was alone, the way Pathfinders were always alone. She had always understood this abstractly. She understood it now very concretely. She turned away from the comm and faced her team. Vance was calm. Haroon was scared in the way smart people get scared. Not frozen, but running scenarios behind his eyes, and she could see the color of the calculations in his face. Petra was still at the lab table, still looking at the stone, and the look on her face was something Doss had to look away from, because it was complicated in a way she didn't have time for right now. "Options," she said. "Vance, we can get to the cormorant," Vance said immediately. "It's 400 meters. If those things move the way they were moving, We have maybe 40 minutes before they're between us and the ship. We'd have to go through them to get there, Haroon said. We'd have to go through some of them. Not all of them. Vance's thumb was going against his palm again hard. The ship's laser array, it's rated for cutting through geological material, rock. Basically rock. We don't know that will hurt them, Haroon said. We don't know it won't. Doss looked at the window. The shapes were closer. Moving with that terrible patience, Petra, she said. How do we stop them? The biologist did not look up from the specimen. I don't know yet. Best guess, Commander. Best guess, Doctor. I need something in the next 10 minutes. Petra finally looked up. Her eyes were red at the rims, which Doss filed away without comment. They metabolize sulfur. They exhale oxygen. High oxygen environments should be toxic to them, same way sulfur is toxic to us. But I don't know concentration. I don't know exposure time. I don't know if it would be fast enough to make a difference. She paused. And I don't know if we have enough oxygen stored in this outpost to matter. Doss looked at the supply manifest on the wall panel. The outpost's emergency oxygen stores, rated for 20 people for 30 days, were listed at 84% capacity. 2 teams had used the other 16%. The stores sat in a tank beneath the floor of the central module. 300 liters of compressed liquid oxygen. 300 liters. She thought about the valley outside, the shapes moving in it. How much would we need, she asked. To stop them, I have no idea. To slow them down, Petra's jaw tightened. If we could vent it, if we could release it in a controlled area, maybe. The exterior vents, Haroon said very quietly. The atmospheric management system. It's designed to push pressurized gas outward to equalize pressure differentials during dust events. If we ran the oxygen through that system, we'd be creating a concentrated oxygen environment on the surface, Doss said, which is toxic to them, possibly, hypothetically. In 40 minutes we're going to wish we'd tried the hypothesis, Vance said. Doss looked at each of them in turn. This was the part that the mission briefings never quite captured. The weight of it, the specific gravity of a moment when you understood that the decision you made in the next 60 seconds was going to define everything that came after. She had been in bad situations before. She had made calls before. She had stood in rooms like this and felt the specific pressure of command like a physical thing pressing against the inside of her sternum. Every time, some part of her wanted to wait for someone else to decide. Every time that part of her lost. Okay, she said. Here's what we're doing. She laid it out quickly, because quickly was all they had. Haroon would route the oxygen lines through the atmospheric management system and rig a manual release. Vance would go to the cormorant, alone, because she needed him there. Because if everything went sideways, they needed someone at the ship who could get it off the ground. Petra would stay with Doss in the central module and monitor the creature's response via scanner. If the oxygen worked, they would know within minutes. If it didn't work, they would know that too. And they would have less than 30 minutes to make a different choice. I don't like that plan, Haroon said. Neither do I, Doss said. Go, he went. Vance sealed his suit, checked the exterior window, and went for the door. He paused with his hand on the lock. You know, he said, when I signed up for Pathfinder, I told my sister it was the safest job in the service. No combat, no enemies, just exploration, a short pause. She said that sounded like the most dangerous thing she'd ever heard of. She was right, Doss said. He smiled, just barely, one corner of his mouth, and opened the door and went into the gray light. Doss watched through the window as he moved across the valley floor, picking his path between the shapes, which were closer now, close enough that she could see, or imagine she could see, the slow grinding motion of their progress, the way the porous volcanic surface of each one shifted slightly as it moved, like a thing breathing. She watched Vance move through them and not look at them, the way you don't look at things that might respond to being looked at. And she counted his steps until he was at the cormorant's boarding ramp and inside. Rail, Haroon said, from beneath the floor panel he'd pulled up to access the oxygen lines. I need you to hand me the large torque driver red handle. Yes, that one. She handed it to him. How long? 20 minutes for the rerouting. 10 if I make shortcuts that might kill us later. 20, she said. Don't make shortcuts. She went back to the window. The shapes were very close now. The nearest was perhaps 60 meters, sitting in a shallow depression in the rock, perfectly still, as all of them went still whenever she looked directly at them. She had the distinct and unsettling impression that this was intentional, that they understood the concept of being observed and had made a decision about how to behave under observation. She pressed her palm against the cold glass and looked at the nearest creature. It sat there, gray and pitted and indistinguishable from the geological wreckage around it. And she understood something with a sudden clarity that went all the way through her. Not fear, exactly. Recognition. This creature, whatever it was patient in a way that humans had never been patient. It would wait. It could wait for a century, for a millennium, sitting in its poisonous volcanic valley, breathing sulfur and exhaling oxygen, and living its strange silicon mineral life with no concept of hurry, no concept of frustration, no concept at all of the two-legged things that had arrived on its world in a metal tube and started taking it apart. It had no concept of them because it had never needed one, until now. Petra, she said, without turning from the window. What are they? Best theory. Big picture native life, Petra said. She was at the workstation, running comparisons. The oldest geological surveys of this planet are only 6 years old. We didn't look closely enough. They've been here for maybe 50,000 years. Maybe 100,000. They're the apex life form of this entire planet. They're the only life form of this entire planet. A pause. We landed on their world and started building without ever checking if anyone was home. We didn't check because all our instruments said nothing was alive here. Our instruments were looking for life that looked like ours. Doss said nothing to that. Outside, 60 meters away, the nearest creature shifted. Just barely. Just enough that, if she hadn't been watching for it, she would have missed it. It was facing her now, or the part of it that she had come to think of as its front was oriented toward the window where she stood. Toward her. She did not step back from the window. Done, Haroon said from below the floor. The routing is complete. The release valve is this. He held up a yellow lever mounted to a newly installed bracket beside the floor access hatch. Pull it and hold it, and the oxygen goes out through the exterior vents for as long as the tank has pressure. What concentration outside? I don't know exactly. Enough to make the air breathable for us without suits. In a concentrated area, close to the vents, significantly more than that. Doss looked at the shapes outside. They were all still now, all oriented, she realized, toward the outpost, all of them. How many bodies in this room, she said, were people who signed the same waiver we signed? 6, Petra said softly. And they all came here in good faith, doing their jobs, and they are dead because we didn't check if anyone was home. She took her hand off the window glass. That matters. It should matter. We should carry it. She reached down and took hold of the yellow lever. But it doesn't change what comes next. She pulled it. The sound the exterior vents made was a low, deep exhalation. Pressurized oxygen rushing outward through the vents in the outpost foundation and outer walls. On the scanner, Petra watched the atmospheric readings outside shift from saline to elevated oxygen in 90 seconds. In 2 minutes, the concentration near the outpost walls was 3 times the baseline atmospheric oxygen content of Zeta 9, which, given that the baseline was close to 0, made the outpost walls the most oxygen-rich place on the planet. The creatures, which had been still, began to move, not toward the outpost, away. It was slow at first, the same grinding, patient motion, but now reversed, now retreating, the nearest ones pulling back from the vent outlets where oxygen was streaming outward in invisible rivers. Then faster. Not panicked, she didn't think these creatures panicked. She didn't think they had a concept that mapped to panic, but purposeful, deliberate. The pattern of motion changed from convergence to dispersal, the creatures spreading outward, seeking the sulfurous terrain away from the outpost, back toward the ridgelines where the vents steamed, and the air tasted of nothing humans could breathe. It's working, Petra said, and her voice was not quite steady. Keep watching, Doss said. She held the lever and felt the vibration of the oxygen flowing through it, and watched 60-plus creatures that had killed 18 people over 14 months withdraw from a prefabricated metal box on a volcanic world at the edge of the Milky Way, because inside that box, there was a human who had not yet run out of ideas. Tank pressure began to drop. She could see the gauge on Haroon's rigged display. They had maybe 15 more minutes of sustained flow. Vance, she said into the comm. Are you watching? Watching and recording, Vance said from the cormorant. Path is clear between here and you. I count at least 50, maybe 60 of the things, all moving away. If you're going to run, now is the time. Petra, Doss said. Can we carry the specimen? The specimen is still alive, Petra said. There was something in her voice that Doss had been expecting since the secondary lab. Something that had been building since she'd read that the creatures were intelligent enough to grieve. Rael, we killed their child. This started because we killed one of them in a lab. She looked at the specimen container on the workstation, the stone inside, slowly cycling its impossible alien breath. If we take it, if we leave it, someone else comes back here with bigger weapons and tries harder, Doss said. The silence stretched. Outside, the creatures were still retreating. The oxygen continued to flow. If we take it, Petra said finally, and if it survives, and if we can demonstrate to command that what we have here isn't a threat but a resident species, one we wronged, one that responded to being wronged, then maybe they don't come back with bigger weapons. Maybe they stop the colonization program. She stopped. I know how that sounds. It sounds like a pathfinder, Doss said. She picked up the specimen container. Let's go. They ran. Haroon went first, out the door and into the gray alien light, the oxygen-rich air around the outpost immediately visible as a faint shimmer where it met the warmer volcanic atmosphere. And the creatures were 30, 40, 50 meters away now, clustered near the ridgelines, sitting very still again. Watching. Doss went last, the specimen container in her left hand, her right hand on the exterior door, and she stopped in the doorway, just for a second, just for the space of one breath, and looked out at the valley. The scale of it hit her. The way scale always hits you on an alien world, the way it cuts through all the training and the briefings and the mission parameters and reminds you that you are a small, warm, temporary thing standing on a rock that had been here before your species had learned to walk upright, and would be here long after everything your species had ever built was dust. The creatures on the ridgeline were also small, in their way, small against the ridgeline, small against the planet, old and patient and real in a way that felt different from how she had expected aliens to feel real. They were not enemies. They had never wanted to be enemies. They had wanted, as near as she could tell, what every living thing wants, to be left alone in its world. She was going to make sure someone heard that. She ran. The path between the outpost and the cormorant was clear, and she covered it in 90 seconds flat. Haroon 3 strides ahead of her, and she hit the boarding ramp running, and Vance pulled the ramp up behind her before her second foot was fully on it. The boarding door sealed. The engine noise was already cycling up. Vance had been sitting in the pilot's chair with his hand on the throttle. She got to the cockpit doorway, and he looked at her, and she nodded, and he lifted them off the ground in a smooth, controlled burn that pushed the valley floor away below them in seconds. She went to the rear observation port and looked down. The creatures on the ridgeline were still there, all of them. As the cormorant rose above them and the valley shrank to a fold in the planet's vast dark surface, she watched the creatures on the ridgeline, and they were still. Not retreating now, not advancing. Just watching, if watching was something they did. If the orientation of that biological mass toward a rising ship constituted anything that could be called watching, she found herself wanting it to be. She found herself wanting very badly for there to be a consciousness behind those pitted volcanic exteriors that understood something of what had just happened. That 3 humans in a metal tube had figured out, in the space of a few hours, what it had taken 4 teams and 18 deaths to begin to understand. And then had chosen, when they had the option to destroy, not to. She held that thought for a long time as Zeta 9 fell away beneath them. The report she filed was 37 pages. She wrote it in the 12 hours before they reached the communications relay station, writing steadily and without rereading, because if she read it she would start editing it, and if she started editing it she would start softening it, and she had made a decision, somewhere over that valley in the gray alien light, not to soften it. She wrote about the creatures in clinical language where clinical language served, and in plain language where it didn't. She wrote about the biology, the mineral integration, the sulfur metabolism, the oxygen sensitivity, and she wrote about the intelligence, the deliberate arrangement of the bodies, the reproductive stones placed in the chest cavities of the dead, the way the creatures had modulated their behavior under observation. She wrote about what the logs of the first and second teams indicated about the sequence of events. She wrote the sentence that she suspected Central Command would find most inconvenient. The killings at Outpost Zeta 9 were a response to an act of aggression committed unknowingly by the first Pathfinder team. We woke them. We owe them. Then she wrote the part about Petra's specimen. The creature was still alive in its sealed container. The atmosphere inside maintained at Zeta 9 baseline by the cormorant's environmental systems. It was, Petra had determined with increasing certainty, a juvenile. Not an egg, a juvenile. An individual, small, alive, its slow alien consciousness doing whatever slow alien consciousness did in the dark of a sealed container on an unfamiliar ship. Petra visited it every hour. She had begun talking to it during the visits, not because she thought it understood her words, but because she thought it might register, might have some mechanism for registering the pattern and rhythm of a calm voice versus an agitated one. She was trying to tell it, through the only channel available to her, that it was not going to be killed in a lab. Doss didn't put that part in the report. Some things needed to happen before they could be explained. She filed the report and then sat in the common area with Haroon and Vance, and a bottle of something from Vance's kit that turned out to be a very decent grain spirit, and they drank 1 cup each and didn't talk much. And after a while Haroon started humming something his mother had taught him. Something without any obvious structure, a melody that circled and came back to itself and went nowhere in particular. And Doss listened to it and thought about 18 pathfinders on a world at the edge of the Milky Way, and a valley full of creatures who breathed out oxygen and embedded their children in the chests of their dead. Vance poured a second cup. She didn't object. Central Command received the report on day 4. The response came on day 5, 12 words, stand by. Specimen to be transferred to Research Division on arrival. She looked at the message for a long time. Then she forwarded it to Petra, who looked at it and said very quietly, "No, that's what I said," Doss told her. "We brought it back to save it," Petra said. "Not to put it in another lab." "I know. If they put it in a lab, I know." They looked at each other across the specimen container, the creature inside cycling its ancient alien breath in the dark, and Doss thought about the report she had filed and the sentence she had written, "We owe them," and what that sentence meant, concretely, practically, in terms of what she was willing to do when the Cormorant docked at the relay station in 36 hours and someone in a uniform that outranked hers came aboard to collect the specimen. She thought about what Pathfinders were, at the core of it, volunteers. People who signed the waiver and went first. People who made decisions in the field that couldn't wait for Command to weigh in, because Command was 82 light minutes away, and the situation was now. She thought about the valley, the gray light. The creatures watching her ship rise. "When we dock," she said, "there's going to be a conversation. And during that conversation, I'm going to need you to be very busy with the specimen's life support parameters." Petra's eyes were steady. How busy? Busy enough that an inadvertent atmospheric breach in the specimen container becomes the only responsible medical action available. A long pause. "The sulfur content of the station's docking bay atmosphere," Petra said slowly, "is going to be far too low to sustain it." "Far too low," Doss agreed. "We'd have no choice but to vent it to the external bay atmosphere, which vents, as I understand the station's design, to open space." Another pause. "It would die," Petra said. "It would be beyond our control," Doss said. "The station's external atmosphere is not classified as controlled space. Anything released to it is beyond recovery." Petra looked at the container. Inside it, something breathed. "Or," she said, "we could tell them it died in transit. Atmospheric management failure. The container logs are in my administrative access." Doss considered this. "That would be a falsification of mission records." "Yes," Petra said. The container sat between them. The creature inside it breathed its slow, volcanic breath. Outside the Cormorant's hull, the stars of the outer arm burned cold and indifferent across 300 light-years of absolutely silent space. "Log the failure at 2300 hours, Doss said. "I'll countersign it." The station debrief lasted 11 hours. Commander Doss sat in a chair in a room with 3 people who outranked her and answered their questions for 11 hours with the precision and detail of someone who had filed a 37-page report and stood behind every word of it. She was patient. She was thorough. She was honest about everything except the thing she had chosen not to be honest about. And that thing she did not mention, and they did not ask about directly, because the report had included a clear notation of the specimen's atmospheric management failure, and the container logs supported it. After 11 hours, the senior officer across the table from her, a gray-haired director named Holte, who had been running Pathfinder oversight for 9 years and had the particular tiredness of someone who has spent 9 years sending volunteers into the unknown, looked at her for a long moment and then said, "The colonization program for Zeta 9 is on hold pending review." "I appreciate that," Doss said. "The review may determine that the program continues." "I understand. And your recommendation?" She had written it in the report. She said it again anyway, because some things needed to be said out loud, in rooms with people who had the power to act on them. "Zeta 9 is occupied. We don't have a right to colonize occupied territory, regardless of whether the occupants communicated their occupation in terms we could initially recognize. We missed them because we were looking for life that looked like ours. and we should have been looking harder. The species on Zeta 9 has been there for at least 50,000 years. They have a right to their world." She paused. "We should go back, not to colonize. To observe properly this time, and to look for a way to communicate. And we should go back understanding what we owe them." Director Holta looked at her for another long moment. He had the look of a man who understood that the thing he was hearing was correct, and that the thing being correct was going to make the next several years of his career very complicated. "Dismissed," he said. She found Vance and Haroon in the station's common lounge. Vance had found coffee, real coffee, not the rehydrated variety. And there were 3 cups on the table, the third presumably for her. She sat down and picked it up. "How'd it go?" Haroon asked. "The colonization program is on hold." Vance looked into his cup. "Pending review." "Pending review. And the creature?" She drank her coffee. It was very good coffee, and she thought about the station stores, and how long they might keep real coffee versus the rehydrated kind. And she thought about the valley on Zeta 9, and the creatures moving across it in that gray flat light, patient and alien and absolutely uninterested in being understood by anything. And she thought about the small biological stone sitting in Petra's pocket. Not the specimen container. Just Petra's pocket. As the biologist walked slowly through the station's service corridors toward the external atmosphere management system, with a face like someone who had made a decision she was going to stand behind. "Lost in transit," Doss said. "Atmospheric failure." Haroon looked at her. He didn't say anything. "It's a shame," Vance said, and there was nothing in his voice that suggested he thought it was a shame at all. Outside the station's observation windows, the stars of the outer arm burned cold and silent, and somewhere 82 light minutes away, on a dark volcanic world at the edge of the galaxy, 60-odd creatures that breathed sulfur and exhaled oxygen were doing what they had always done, sitting in their valley, patient beyond any human conception of the word, waiting out a threat that had, for the first time in 14 months, withdrawn. Doss finished her coffee. She thought about the next briefing, the next mission, the next waiver she would sign, 3 pages, which she would read completely. There would be other worlds. There would be other outposts, other signals, other valleys full of things that human instruments hadn't been designed to see. That was the job. That was always going to be the job. Going first, making mistakes, learning from them, trying to do better. She thought about Petra, somewhere in the service corridors, carrying a creature home the only way left to her. She thought about the 18 names that would go into the incident report as a formal notation of loss, which was the minimum anyone could do for them, and was not enough, but was what there was. She thought about the 4 body bags in the Cormorant's cargo bay, which they had brought out of habit and optimism, and which they were bringing back empty. Not because no one had died, but because the bodies on Zeta 9 belonged to Zeta 9 now, belonged to that valley and that gray light and that ancient volcanic patience. And some part of her understood that this was right, that the dead should stay with the world that had killed them. That this too was a form of acknowledgement. She set her cup down. "So," she said. "What's next?" Vance pulled a data tablet from his jacket and slid it across the table. A new mission briefing, a new world, another edge of another system, another planet, with another notation that said no biological activity detected by standard survey parameters. And she had learned, now, what that meant and what it didn't mean, and she would carry that knowledge with her to the next place and the next, and, as far as it needed to go. She picked up the tablet. She began to read. Outside, the stars burned on.